Welcome to Frequency. I'm Jenni Fields.
And I'm Chuck Gose. Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture, and employee experience beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. And Jenni, we are getting together today after spending some time with each other in Nashville at Unile's Unite event. We had been talking about that on the podcast for a while and how we were going to be recording a live episode. So if you're listening to this and you're in the room, hope you enjoyed it. If you watched it broadcasted, hope you enjoyed it as well. If you missed both of those, we are going to get the recording and publish it here. We talked about some great content there. We had some great interaction in the room. And like I said, Jenni, it was just great being in person with you in Nashville. What was your big takeaway from your first trip to Nashville?
My biggest takeaway from Nashville, which I've said to everybody since I've been back, is just the variety of what you can do in Nashville. I think everyone thinks it's just drinking bourbon and being in a honky-tonk, which of course is a big part of it. But having explored the city, found little places for brunch and some of the history in the parks and all of that stuff, I think it was such a lovely place to go. And that Southern hospitality really sort of shone through when we were there. I just had the best time. Thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, I've always compared Nashville. It's one of those unique cities where it just stands out from all the others. Yes, there's a businesses and all those things that are there, but I compare it to a bit of like New Orleans or a Vegas and put Nashville in there, where it just has its own unique feel. Every city is obviously its own city, but I'm glad you got to experience that. And it was great recording that episode with each other. And while I was there, I kept telling people I had to get back Wednesday night because the next day, my wife and I were flying out to Vegas for an early 50th celebration, which I thought was just going to be the two of us. And turned out it was not just the two of us, that there were many friends and people from the comms community who came out to join me. I was surprised, even though I pulled this on her for her birthday a couple years ago. I didn't expect this, and it just meant a lot to see so many people come out and spend that early 50th. It's not my 50th yet. Early 50th birthday with us in Vegas.
Yeah, it looked like good fun. I love that you're really stretching out your 50th celebration as well. I mean, I did a whole year for my 40th, so yeah, I'm here for it.
Yeah, it was sort of the last pool weekend in Vegas, so we did get some good pool time there, which is not a guarantee in October. But we got to hit up our usual spots. We were also proud of ourselves. We got to check out some new spots when we were there as well, because we were there Thursday to Tuesday. So you got a little bit of time in there to explore. But yeah, that was really amazing weekend that I got to spend with friends there. But let's get into our content this week. Jenni, what have you picked for us?
So I have got a nice selection of stories today. We've got a couple of research reports that we're going to talk about. One that's going to talk a bit more about frontline workers. It's some research done with communications leaders in the USA and Canada, but the research focuses on frontline workers. So we're going to have a chat about that. Also going to talk about an article in Strategic magazine by Mike Klein, who talks about the pivot from engaged to effective. And I'll touch on that and my thoughts on what Mike's written. And I've also got a piece from Benjamin Ellis, who I've worked with for a long time over the years. And he has made a really good challenge around working for one of the top places to work. So we'll come on to that a little bit later as well. But I want to kick us off with the first research report, which is from the team at Workvivo, who have done some research with around 5,000 leaders looking at internal communications from an ROI perspective. So big topic, value, impact, return on investment of internal comms. The research they've done says 92% of internal communication professionals say they can't prove any return on investment. 46% say that their metrics don't resonate with leadership. And 36% are reporting very high employee engagement with internal communication. So The press release they've issued on this says, despite unprecedented executive support and growing budgets, 92% of internal comms leaders admit they struggle to prove ROI of their work. This is according to this new global study from Workvivo by Zoom. And it's a study that's done over 5,000 global internal comms professionals who really talk about this difficulty for internal comms demonstrating value. Now, I'm going to do a little side note here because I've just wrapped up a report that I'm doing with Dr. Kevin Ruck, which is looking at academic and industry reports into the value and impacts of internal comms. So I'm not going to talk about that today, but I am going to bring that onto the podcast in a couple of weeks when that launches at the end of October. But this report goes on to talk about the fact that 84% of internal comms professionals are saying they have sufficient budget, 78% saying they're viewed as strategic by the C-suite, but they have this inability to show return on investment, and they feel that that is risking declining engagement, loss of influence, and that seat at the table. So they've gone on to talk about it. Their principal people scientist, Stephen Buck, has talked about the fact that internal comms is more visible, it's better resourced than ever, but teams can't prove their impact. They go on in the report to identify 3 barriers to proving impact. The fact that the metrics don't resonate, so it's not talking the language of leaders. They've got poor tools and data, and they have some engagement challenges. So only 36% are reporting very high levels of engagement with internal comms. Now, I read this, and this is my question for you, Chuck, with a bit of paraphrasing at the beginning, but the data says 84% of internal comms professionals say they have sufficient budget, and 78% are saying they're viewed as strategic. So this feels actually like quite positive research compared to some of the stuff we've seen before from people like Gallagher and their state of the sector. I read this thinking, I don't know why demonstrating value matters if 84% of you have got sufficient budget and 78% of you are being seen as strategic. So unpick this for me because I can't make it make sense.
Yeah, I'm a bit puzzled too by the 84% number of saying that they have, and maybe the word sufficient. Maybe that's the tricky part of this. Maybe we're always like feeling like, well, we have to be grateful for what we have. So maybe that's where the sufficient part comes in. I think people always want more. So maybe we sort of dinged ourselves on that one a bit, but saying with like, we're okay with what we have when we should be always, I think, sort of asking for more. The data point that stood out to me, which is the one they really lead with in the whole report, which is that 92% struggle reporting ROI or showing ROI, which just further cements my belief that that is not anything that comms should be trying to figure out. Like ROI is a financial metric. So much of what we do doesn't have financial implications direct to what we do. It might trickle on down the way. So return on investment, we've sort of polluted that term by thinking just what are we getting as a result of this? Where return on investment is truly, we bought this, we are now getting value in this. So I think this just further cements that we should just eliminate ROI from the conversation and either come up with a new one. We've seen, like I've talked about COI, which is cost of inaction. What is the cost of not communicating? What is the cost of not making an investment in comms, looking at it that way? Or is it something simply as return on message or showing that impact? And how are we aligning to certain business value, different business metrics out there that do matter to the business? I just think it just shows that we should stop focusing on ROI. And because I would love to know from the 8% that don't, what are you not teaching the other 92% about this?
Tell us everything you know. But I think that's such a valid point, because I do feel like we get stuck in this same conversation, you know, and we've talked about having the same conversation a lot recently, but it feels like, to your point, you can't prove ROI. As you were talking, it was making me think about the conversation I had with one of my CEOs, and it's a story I often tell, where she talked about value. What value does it bring? And I didn't know what value meant to her in the context of communication because it wasn't financial. And she said to me when I asked her, it's risk and reputation. So then I reframed everything to be around that, rather than, you know, we need to go and make sure people are engaged in our new digital platform. The conversation was, there's a risk someone's going to spend £500,000 on a different platform. I need to go and sort that out. That isn't an ROI, because that's not what the value is. And I think this also shows that gap between leaders and internal comms. They're saying 46% say their metrics don't resonate with leadership. Well, that's because we're probably talking about clicks and reading numbers and all that stuff, and not the stuff that's actually what we mean by value. So I think for me, this shows the need for more conversation with leaders about what they really care about, and then making sure your communication function is doing the work that's aligned to that, rather than just what you think we should be doing.
I think the other data that did surprise me in the report, and I'm going to go to the report so I can read this and get it accurately. The question was, how do IC professionals feel internal comms strengthens their business? So what role does comms play? And only half felt, or I should say only half, putting my own bias in there, half feels that it boosts engagement and morale. Okay, I could see that half might think it does, half might think it won't. But the fact that only 37% feel that it reduces misinformation and rumors, so again, that feels like comms should do more of reducing those things. Only a third say that it builds trust in the company, which I feel like something seems off there. A third, strengthening culture, which I'll align with trust in that way. Like those things, and like, again, starting off numbers here, 45% aligns teams with goals. I'm like, what is this a big part of what comms is missing here? Like, shouldn't you be focusing on reducing misinformation, building trust, strengthening culture, aligning teams with goals? Like those numbers just seem.
I mean, it always begs more questions, doesn't it? I always think this about surveys: is where's the focus group that follow them? Where's the additional data? Because I think there needs to be bigger conversations about this, because it does just feel so different to other research in this space about where things are and where the focus is for internal communicators around trust, around all of those things that are coming in quite low here are actually coming in quite high on other data points. So interesting. More data is always helpful, because I think it's always useful for business cases and having conversations like this that help us push that conversation forward. I'm going to take us on to the article from Mike Klein, who is the editor of Strategic Magazine. And Mike has written a piece called The Big Shift, a Pivot from Engaged to Effective. And in the article, Mike is talking about AI, and he's talking about AI automating routine tasks. So what he's saying is that what really becomes valuable is judgment rather than effort. And he claims that internal communication has long pushed discretionary effort via engagement, citing that around the turn of the century, Gallup popularised employee engagement surveys tied to promises of higher productivity and profits. And Mike says that we must replace that mindset. Instead of trying to boost how people feel at work, we should give them the context, clarity, and alignment to make better decisions. So the shift he's suggesting is from engagement to effective discretion. Now, I was reading this article and I completely agree with Mike about the focus on context, clarity, and alignment. I think that's really important for communicators. Where I don't agree with Mike is his interpretation of Gallup. Having gone down a rabbit hole of Gallup work this year and looking at their employee engagement data, looking at their book Culture Shock, where he talks about the fact that engagement surveys tied to promises of higher productivity and profits, the productivity piece is where I take an issue, because that isn't really what Gallup have said. They've never said that. They've talked a lot about engagement, employee engagement linking to customer engagement, linking to better business outcomes and profitability. But I don't see productivity particularly playing a role in there. And I also think that framing engagement and effectiveness as kind of opposite each other sort of misses where we need to go. I think people who feel disengaged will rarely make good decisions. But the goal is to maybe really integrate engagement, clarity, context with alignment, with effectiveness. So everything is coming together so that we've got engagement and alignment strengthening each other. And that's where I think internal comms can really come in. So my question for you is that we've talked a lot about engagement and internal comms over the years. You have famously said that employee engagement has been the biggest distraction for internal communicators. It's one of your favorite quotes that I use all the time. So what do you think about this? Do you think that comms folks are being measured by employee engagement and that they need to do something about that? Or do you think this is a bit of another misdirection, and actually our focus should continue to be on alignment, communication, and not get sidetracked by this?
I think by default, we are being measured by engagement, especially companies that focused in on that, because we've injected ourselves into that conversation. Therefore, we are being judged by the results of those engagement surveys that happen. Yes, I do believe engagement has become this distraction, but I do think we should look for ways to consistently engage
Mhm.
employees as communicators, just no different than we should feel like how are we engaged as employees in the business. I like Mike's because effectiveness is a tortured subject for me because it's one of these things in my mind that I'm always trying to be as effective as possible in every single thing that I do, to the point that it drives everyone around me crazy at times, even down to something as simple as like making sure the errands we run are in the right order of the stops. So we have to do the right
Mhm.
things, all of those things. So I think effectiveness is something we should all be prioritizing, but I don't think it's helpful to pit that against engagement. I think the two can run parallel, I guess, to each other might be the way to talk about it.
Mhm.
Because to your point, the talking about the Gallup stuff, Gallup does link to hard outcomes in organizations.
Mhm.
And that's what I think communicators should be focusing on. How are we linking what we are doing to hard outcomes in the business? Effectiveness isn't sexy out there. It's crucial, but it's not sexy. But when you start looking at outcomes, when you start looking at improving safety in an organization or quality in an organization, or to your point, productivity in an organization, that's what gets people's attention. And so I
Mm.
think let's again not get lost on, we've sort of missed a mark over here, so now we have to go over here. Like, no, let's focus on like how are we showcasing the impact, and that's through those hard outcomes in the business.
I think it's that simplicity of impact, isn't it? It's how do we come back to that again and again rather than getting lost in some of the other conversations.
I think it's that
Um,
I've always struggled with that discretionary effort part when it comes to the engagement discussion. So you brought this up, now you gotta let me
mhm.
finish. You could have the most engaged person, the most engaged employee, and they don't wanna give their discretionary
Yeah.
effort. That's their choice. They're getting the job done, they love their job, they love what they do, they enjoy their manager, all the hallmarks that you want out of an engaged employee, but discretionary effort, nope, that's mine. I'm
Yeah.
gonna say that for me, and so I think that's the danger in it. That's
Yeah.
part of where we've gotten lost in that conversation.
Yeah, and that's the one I find probably strangest because in my whole career, I don't think I've ever focused on discretionary effort as being an outcome from my internal com stuff. So just shows the breadth of the profession. On to another report today, which is from Dewpoint Communications. They've released a report which is connecting the front line, current trends, challenges, and strategic opportunities in workforce communication. Now, this was research done with comms leaders in the USA and Canada. And the report focuses in on this sort of frontline workers who represent about 80% of the global workforce, contributing trillions to the economy. And the report has highlighted that sort of dangerous disconnection that they've got from their employers. Now, the numbers in the report are staggering. So it says 50% of frontline workers quit last year and another 50% are ready to leave. The average frontline worker waits 4.5 days for critical company updates. I think we've seen similar data from this from the folks at Unily who did some research a while back. And 72% don't understand their company's strategy. 72%. The communication breakdown costs US businesses over $80 billion annually in lost productivity. It goes on to say that there's this urgent part, which is that by 2030, there will be 12 million available US jobs for every 1.5 million worker. Companies need to hire 240,000 plus people monthly just to replace retirees. So this talent war is already here. I think this is just going to get worse and worse. The solution, so companies prioritizing frontline communication see 82% employee retention versus 50% of an industry average, plus 73% increases in customer satisfaction and $4.41 return for every safety communication dollar spent. So that's really important from a frontline deskers perspective. So the companies that are really figuring out this connection, this communication, those are the ones that will dominate, those are the ones that are doing it very well. Are we at this tipping point? I've done research into deskless workers in the UK. This is USA and Canada. It's where you sort of I was going to say got your teeth into, but there's a phrase I can't dig out now. It's where you cut your teeth. Is that the phrase? What is it? Anyway, where you got stuck into internal comms with deskless and frontline workers. So is this it? Are we now at the tipping point with such big stats about the changing in that war on talent and the percentage of people that are quitting and starting? Or is this just more data that says the same thing and nothing's going to change?
I think what I want to give credit for this research is they did do a good job of, and I compare this a lot of the comms roles, they're pulling a lot of data from a lot of different sources together to tell this narrative, where a lot of these things have sat in silos or in their own little buckets and different reports. They pulled these into one to, I think, really try to showcase the challenges and the opportunities ahead of us. I think some of the data that stood out to me was around that, like that half of frontline workers quit in 2023.
Hmm.
I don't know that that's necessarily a unique number. I just don't know that that's a number that a lot of people realize the amount of turnover that exists in frontline workforce, unless you are in an environment with a lot of frontline employees. And especially in like retail, hospitality, sometimes organizations have 100+% turnover in a year, which if you're in an industry that might have 5 or 10%, it's hard to get your head around the challenges that exist when you have that high a turnover. But that's the nature of some of those industries when you might hire 16, 17, 18-year-old employees to work in there. Plus, then people can just be more flexible in their career. So I think it highlights some of those things that maybe more people just need to understand. I think it's that 82% of employees who rate communication excellent plan to stay. So counter that to, some of the Workvivo research that we talked about earlier. And 89% of frontline workers would stay if employers genuinely listen. And I think it's that genuine part is the key part. It's not just the here, fill this out, and we're not going to take it seriously. But if they actually feel heard, which says to me, if half are leaving, if 89% said they would stay, but half are leaving, they don't feel like they're being heard. So that's automatically an opportunity for comms or HR to step in and lean in and actually build a strategy, a platform, something so that there's that two-way communication that employees feel like they also have a voice in there as a part of it. The other thing that I want to highlight, and this is something, Jenni, you and I have disagreed on in the past. I don't know if you remember this or not, but it talks about, and I actually want to pull up the report here so I can find the exact words that it says here, that one of the quick wins it talks about is digital signage. And one of the I think that's one of the channels we haven't talked about much on this podcast. And it's highlighted as one of the quick wins in here, which is like get smart about and strategic about digital signage. 59% of frontline workers say workplace digital signage makes them more productive. Now, again, we could talk about that. What is productive? What is productivity out there? But I think that's one of those technologies that comms has missed the mark on that sounds like it might actually make a difference to frontline employees. And I see you somewhat biting your lip as I'm talking about this. So I'm curious what is going through your head at this point in time.
So many thoughts. So digital signage, I think there's context needed there. So if they're saying that it helps them do their job, is that what the stat was? I couldn't find it.
Makes them more productive.
Makes them more productive. So we need to be clear about what digital signage that is that they are using. So when you ask somebody in a frontline or deskless environment, what is that digital signage? Because if it is digital signage as a team, you're using that and it's showing you how many boxes have gone out or how many coffees have been served, and that helps you with that, right? That's a different kind of digital signage to the research that I've done, which says that digital signage isn't effective as a communication tool. And that's digital signage that is put in what we call a third space. So in their canteen or their rest areas, which has got content on it that they don't feel is particularly relevant to them. But it's also because a digital screen in that environment is quite intrusive. I can't control whether I interact with that or not because it's in my face as a digital screen. So that's a different kind of digital signage. And I think where I did my research in 2019 and 2023, I think digital signage has come on a long way in that time frame in terms of how it's used and what it's used for from an operational perspective. So I don't disagree with the stats. But I'd want to know specifically what that digital signage is, because if you read that and then thought, oh, let's chuck TV screens into every canteen, you'll disengage them. I stand by that, because that's not where they work. Where they work is in the coffee shop, in the ward, wherever it might be. So yeah, so I do have a different view on digital screens, but context, right? That's all.
Well, we don't chuck anything anywhere,
I
first
say
off.
chuck again.
Secondly, digital signage is digital signage. It's the content that is ultimately the important part. And I think that's, again, where comms has missed the mark. It's not, yes, it's not just the big billboard messages, but it's really understanding, what do employees want and need at that point in time where they are. So
Yeah,
if it is signage when they are walking into the building, it could be certain messages versus someone leaving the building.
yeah,
You know exactly the behavior at that point in time and what people need and where they're going. To your point, is it, if you're in a manufacturing, is it on the line? Is it letting you know productivity numbers or schedules or what's to come? Again, it's the content that drives it. The technology is the same.
yeah,
But this is where I think comms has missed the mark. We've actually underserved it by just blanketing up what used to be glorified PowerPoint on a
yeah.
screen and assuming that was good enough. We know that's not good enough, but employees clearly do care about this technology and what it can help them do in their job.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree. Right, our last article today is the LinkedIn post from Benjamin Ellis, who I've mentioned at the start of this episode. Now, I've worked with Benjamin for well over a decade, probably two. I interviewed him for my first book. He was involved in helping me shape some of my thinking for my second book. He is an absolute gem of a human, and I work with him a lot from a data science perspective, and he looks at employee engagement data and insights and all of those things. So I always enjoy his thought-provoking content. And what he shared this week on LinkedIn was linked to a graphic that showed the best places to work in the UK, and it showed ratings from the last 5 years. So it did the top 15 in 2021, 2022, and so on up to 2025. But what he wrote in his post really got me thinking, which is why I wanted to bring it here. So he said, in quotes, "We're in the top 10 places to work. It's a klaxon going off loudly. I understand why people want that badge, but it's a lit match under a fuse, not a bolt on the stable gate." There is a quote usually attributed to Charles Spurgeon that goes like this: "If you find a perfect church, don't join it or you'll ruin it." Hold that thought. Getting into a top N list, where N is any number that you care to choose, whether it's the top 10, top 25, top 100, requires getting people to say the company is a great place to work. At least I've yet to see any award or list that works off of something else. Say is not feel. And leaning on people to say that their reality is different from their experience, and even the most well-intentioned organizations end up providing at least implicit pressure once they sign up for these things, creates a disconnect that's hard to repair. He goes on to say that then they come along, the broken and the disaffected, who want to work somewhere that's great. They don't want to fix a bad workplace. They want to leave that. They want to munch the greener grass on the other side at a good one. So they arrive, expectations set high for these new green pastures, and then they discover that the lived experience of "it's 2% better here" is not the paradise they were hoping for. And it certainly isn't the great of their expectations. It's probably just good. And that, against their high bar, is subpar. And then that disaffection sets in. And then we've got this old and new swirling together in this pot of dissatisfaction. I loved his take on this best places to work, how people move to them, the say versus the feel. What do you think about these lists, Chuck? Have you ever worked at one of these places? And do you agree with Benjamin's point about that feel versus say, and that this sort of challenge of the unhappy people coming in to the happy people, and then how that sort of swells together?
I have worked at what I would describe as some great places, but I don't know that I've ever worked at a quote unquote great place to work, type place. And I know that is a brand out there
Hmm.
too. So anytime I see lists like these, I'm just not a fan of lists, period.
Yeah.
Whether it's a top 25 this, 40 under 40, 50, whatever the number is, there's always this gamification element to
Mhm.
it, and I know that companies like the Great Places to Work, the actual brand that's out there,
Mhm.
you pay to be a part of that campaign. And so to me, it's always felt a bit pay for play. It's
Oh,
always felt
100%.
like
Yeah.
you are getting your piece of flair to add to your company webpage. And I think what I hadn't thought about, and it's great to hear Benjamin Ellis's name, haven't heard his name in a little while, um, is that experience of the employees seeing that badge in the recruiting process or onboarding or whatever and thinking like, man, I've joined a great place. And maybe they did. Maybe they did.
Mm.
But how much is that marketing? How much is that fluffed
Yeah.
up? And it reminds me of years ago, Zappos, before they were purchased by Amazon, they were sort of known as this amazing culture community and all that. Almost, it became a part of their product, right or wrong, became a part of their product. And you could tour their company. Like you would go on a tour to see Zappos and see this culture. And I know someone that went on the tour and they saw all the party things and all the cool things happening around the business. And they were like, well, what's in that building over there? And like, oh, accounting's in there. And they're like, well, I want to go see that. And they're like, that's not on the tour. And so these things become part of the tour. They become part of what they
Yeah.
want you to see. And I think again, it's that eyes wide open mentality where you've got to go in knowing like, yes, this might be a good thing. This might be a good signal, but it's not maybe the best signal. It's again, I'm just not a list person. And that's something we've
Yeah.
pledged even inside ecology. Like we don't do lists, even to the point of one of our April Fool's jokes years ago was our joke was that we were going to do a list.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but I like Benjamin's point around setting sort of this false expectation of what
Mm.
the employee experience actually will be.
Yeah, and in the list that he's referring to that he shared, and obviously we'll put the link in the show notes, is ratings based on average Glassdoor reviews. So it's not the Great Place to Work or some of those
Mhm.
other bigger ones. But I really like the whole expectation piece and the sort of the 2% margin that could be in there about I want to go somewhere that's great, therefore my expectations are really high, but actually it's probably no different to where you were before because there's all those microclimates and organizations anyway. So I do think there is something about the expectation alignment from an employee experience perspective, which is such a huge part of employee experience around your expectations being met. And that's the psychological contract with the organization, which changes all the time because we change our minds about what we think is important and what isn't, which makes it really hard to get hold of. So I just thought you can get people to say it, but do they really feel it? And actually, are we setting it up for a bit of failure unless it's truly, truly different to somewhere else?
I think it goes into the psychology of which you shared is, and I put it into the sports mindset of do you go to a team because they're winning or do you want to make it a winning team?
Yeah,
And I think that's some people just want to be on a winning team. They just want to
yeah,
go where it's going to be a little bit easier and it's going to be fun. But some people like to be a part of the glow up. They want to be part of to see the before
yeah.
and after photos.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting mindset piece, isn't it? Because he does say in the article that they don't want to stay and fix somewhere; they just want to leave and go where the grass is greener. So what does that say in terms of people's want and need to be part of a solution rather than just be carried along on a wave? I think that's quite interesting. Quite
Yeah.
interesting. So that brings us to the end of our articles this week. What are you freaking out about, Chuck?
So I'm going to come back to my Vegas weekend from
Okay.
before. And it's a quote that my wife, Kristen, shared with me. I don't know if this is her quote. I don't know if she borrowed it from somewhere, but I'm attributing it to her, bringing it into my sphere. And I'm adding this to my soundtracks of my
Okay.
life, which is uh, inconvenience is the price you pay for friends and community. And so often we point out the fact that it's easy for people to flake out. It's easy for people to cancel. It's a be like, whoa, I need to set my boundaries. I need to
Mhm.
do what's right for me. However, going back to our point with our friend Jenni Jones, who we talked about a few weeks back
Yeah.
about supporting your friends, sometimes it's inconvenient. Sometimes it's not in your world of things to do, but that's the price you pay for it. And whether that's a financial price, a price of time, I just truly appreciate everyone who came out. And again, one person of the 15, whatever number, lived in Vegas. So everybody else hopped on a plane and flew there to celebrate with us. So that's, I guess, what I would share with everyone else is sometimes it is inconvenient, but that's the price you pay. That's the price you
Yeah.
pay for it.
Yeah. I like that.
Well, and it goes to what you did earlier this year when you did your 8-hour train ride to and from, right? That was inconvenient, but that's the price you pay.
Yes.
Yes.
100% with you on that. So my freak out this week is actually, I haven't spoken about this yet, but my book has been shortlisted for another award for the Institute of Leadership, which I will find out about middle of November. So I'm quite excited about that. So fingers crossed always for a win, but it's lovely to have it shortlisted again for an award. So really excited about that. And I haven't
again,
acknowledged that a lot. So I'm
this
just
this space on my shelf is not enough.
Yeah.
You have to keep going for more, Jenni.
Yes. So I'm excited. So that's my little freak out this week. So that's it for this week. Thank you for joining us. All of the articles that have inspired this conversation are in the show notes. And don't forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so that you don't miss another episode, and pass this along to someone that you think would enjoy listening or watching, because you can find Frequency on YouTube. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing the music to the show. And we're back every Monday with news, insights and opinions about everything comms and leadership in workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.